Hi guys, I'm Jim and this is Jim's Fix-It Shop. Today we're going to try and get this Ariens snowblower put back together. A lot of pieces laying here. We got new bearings somewheres. Here's the big one. And this goes on the drive disc assembly. Somewhere I have a new small one. I had it last night. I guess I'll go look for it. Go figure. I put it on the shaft where it belongs. It's been one of those weekends. I guess I can blame it on eating too much yesterday. What can I say? So, we got the two new bearings we needed. We got new bushings pressed into the axle flanges. I got to get these names right. Here's one of the old ones. You can see it ate right through the top. It's been on there so long. We've got new bushings made and pressed into the pinion and sprocket, and two new axle shafts. So we're gonna try and stuff this thing together and hope I don't forget to put something in and have to tear it apart again. But you know, things happen. So let me spin the camera around and we'll start putting this thing together. Alright, first thing we want to do is put in the drive disc carrier, that's this assembly here, and the friction disc. They don't call these a clutch disc, sorry. And the first thing we want to do is get the bearing in the bracket. Now I don't want to pull this thing completely apart to press the bearing into the bracket. So I made a little fixture, I guess, to pull the bearing in. And you can see it's got a boss on it, the same size as the ID of the bearing. That centers it. Now to push this into the hole, or pull it in, however you want to say it, you don't want to put any pressure on the inner race, because we're pushing it into a hole that the outer race has to fit into. So when you make this bracket or fixture, you cut away all this inside material, so the only thing that touches the bearing is this outer rim touches the outer race, and that's it. So we're gonna stick this in here. I don't know how you're gonna see it. This screws into the back side and it will pull this in, hopefully. Okay, let's see if we can get this thing in here. We're going to start that on the bolt. I don't know, maybe you can see it a little better now. We're going to stick a socket in here and tighten that up. And I'm hoping you can see that. It's starting to pull the bearing in. Actually, it's going in pretty nice. Now when you make something like this, you want to make sure the outside diameter of this part that's pulling the bearing in to the bracket is smaller than the diameter of the bearing. Otherwise you're going to get this stuck in the hole along with the bearing. Some little tip you want to keep in mind. Well, we must be all the way in, it's tight. Now we'll take the bolt out. And we'll take the, get it unscrewed. Take the fixture off. Probably the last time I ever use that. Now it's in there. Now we got to get the snap ring in. That might be a little more tricky. Okay, we're going to compress this. And these pliers, I'm hoping will, yeah, they did. Sometimes they don't compress them small enough and you can't get it in there. Well, actually, that went in much easier than I thought it was gonna. Surprise, surprise. Now, let's get, I'll turn this a little bit. Alright, now we're gonna put this in through the new bearing. And they call this a drive disc carrier. That's this part here without the disc on. But they call this a friction disc, which, I don't know, just a funny way to call it if you're not going to call that a drive disc. Now the center of this has a hexagon hole in it for the shaft. And we got to get this nut on back here. Now to tighten this nut up as tight as it should be, doing it with a wrench and trying to hold this is not probably the best way to do it. I'm going to put the socket on. I'm going to go through the bearing hole and I'm going to use my impact. Actually, hanging on to this with the impact is probably easier than trying to do it with a ratchet. And that's on there. Turns a lot better than it used to. Now we can mount the bearing in here. First thing you want to do is we'll put the shaft in, and the sprocket does not fit through the hole. So you got to put the shaft in, then put the sprocket on, then the spacer. Now we can put the bearing in here. These are the bearing flanges that actually hold it in. There's one on the inside and one on the outside with 4 nuts. And that's what captures the bearing and keeps it in place and keeps the outer race from turning. Put these 4 nuts on here. And we'll tighten them up. Now these are self-locking nuts. Now before we stick this through the bearing, we want to put the chain on. Then we have a large washer. Then it goes through the bearing. Another large washer. And a self-locking nut. Okay, now I guess the best way is just put a crescent wrench on this shaft. And we need a 3/4 inch socket to tighten this nut up. You don't have to be quite as careful with this hexagon shaft as you do the snappers, because this one is not hollow. Okay, there's that. Now the next shaft we're going to put in is another new one. I'm going to have to move the camera. Okay, we made a new pinion shaft, and that is drilled on the end down through the center to this cross hole, which greases the pinion and sprocket. So now we can slide this thing in. We can get all the shims in there in the right place. You got to put them on before you slide the thing together. I remember where they all go. And this one goes on. And before we put this on, we'll get the chain around it. And I gotta grab a key. Okay, got that key in place. Now I'll try to get this through here. And up in here we got a thrust washer. It's got to get in there. Okay, let's try to get that in there again, I guess. Things aren't cooperating. Gotta get this spacer on. And I don't know how much you can see. Maybe I can turn this a little. And before we stick that through, sorry about that. That was the bank calling. Trying to set up my PayPal account. She had some questions. Now we got to get this thrust washer up in here. Hopefully, somehow. Need somebody with skinnier hands. There we go. Okay, now they have a couple, they call these shaft supports. They just go on the outside of the shaft. I think all it does is thicken up the side wall so it supports the shaft a little better. That's about it. You got these little screws that go in from the outside. I can't see where these do much of anything. There. Now we got to get the roll pins in place. Okay, now we're going to try to get these in here without them flying across the room. This, I think, is going to be the funnest part. Yeah. You got a pin on this side and a pin on this side with friction washers on the outside of the pin between the case. That's what actually keeps this shaft from moving one way or the other and coming out of the case, are these pins. And get them centered the best you can by eye. And good enough. Now again, I'm using punches that are made for roll pins. If you look at the end of that punch, it's got a little pin sticking up, and that is made to fit. Roll pins are just a hollow tube. That's made to fit inside of the hole so it doesn't slip off while you're trying to drive it in. Really handy little punches to have. Now if I can find the right pin for this side. Why they didn't put the same size pins in both sides, I have no clue. So this is going to be a little interesting. We're right up against, oh, we're not going to use that one. It was so old it's split in half trying to pound it in. Guess we'll find another one. Well, wouldn't you know it, I have every size but a 3/16 roll pin. So I stuck a cotter key in there until I get to the hardware this afternoon and buy one. I could drill that hole out to the next size bigger, but that's going to throw my spacing off and I won't be able to get the pin in because it's pretty snug right now up against that thrust washer that keeps everything centered. So I'm pretty much locked in to a 3/16 roll pin. So I guess we'll just put that in there and leave it. Now the next axle we're going to put in is the main axle, and we're going to use these new flange bearings that we made up. This one goes on this side. Now I say we, I didn't make any of these parts. The boss made them all. I just tore it apart, told him what I needed, and I'm putting it back together. Okay, now we need to slide this axle in. I'm going to leave these loose, so it'll probably be easier getting everything in here with them loose. Okay, now we got to get this spacer on here first, because that goes all the way over up against that side. I just started these nuts on so the thing wouldn't fall apart on me. Now we have to get this, they call it a differential gear. We got to get that in there. That might be fun at this point. Now we want to get the key in the axle for the gear. Now I think before I slide this over here and get it pinched between this sprocket and this gear, I think I'm going to put this roll pin in. Yeah, that was a little bit easier. Now, get that key in there without it falling out on me. Maybe I'll put it up at the top. Turn this gear, get the key way up there. There we go. Well, that fits really good. Now I have another roll pin here someplace. Okay, now we can tighten up these bearings on the side. So I could slip over here. Now I had one viewer that wanted to know what the model number of this machine was, and I'll give that to you. The model number of this Ariens machine is a 924081. The serial number is 000491. And that's about it. Now we've got some bolts here for the tires that we're going to slide in. And put the nuts on. Got some new bolts and self-locking nuts for this thing. And I guess when I'm done here, I'll run down the hardware store and get me a couple roll pins. Throw one in a drawer and put one in this machine. Oh, this ought to be fun. Getting that nut down in there. There we go. And this thing is pretty much back together. Got to put the cover on it. Now this is a shifter. I took that off so I could move that assembly a little bit easier. I'll have to put that back on. Yeah, getting this in here, you're upside down again. And that's about it. I think we got this thing put back together. All new bushings. Now the one thing we didn't do on this machine, and when the boss made this new axle, you can see that the other side does not. This side sticks out past the wheel hub. And if I can take this I'll take this nut back off. For some reason, they designed this so this had a 1/4-inch piece of bar stock with 2 cotter keys in it. So you could, I guess, easily pull the cotter key out, pull the pin, move this tire out to this position and put it back together. Why on earth would you want to do that? The tire is sticking out past the side of the machine. You're going to be running into your snowbank like that. They also had, grab this old axle, they also had a snap ring groove cut into this old axle with a snap ring on it that went in here. Now, when we made the axle, I told them we don't need that snap ring because we didn't know what it was for. But after thinking about this, my Ariens snowblower has a bar sticking out with a handle on it that I can come out and pull on that, and it disconnects this tire from the drivetrain. That makes it easier to go around corners. But if you don't have a nice paved driveway and you got a lot of snow, you want both of these tires to turn as the machine is running. Otherwise, it's very hard to keep them going in a straight line. They're going to want to pull one direction if you only have one wheel driving. That's what this snap ring was for. It went on this shaft. You could pull this pin out. The snap ring kept the tire from coming off, but it allowed it to spin free. Well, it's a 25-year-old machine, and they never used that option. So I told them don't bother putting a groove in there. Now, once I figured out what it's for, and I tell him if he wants to use that option, I'll pull the axle out and we can put that ring groove in there. But personally, I wouldn't use it. I have never pulled mine out and used mine with just one-wheel drive. I almost forgot something. Like I said, I've never had one of these apart before. You gotta take that tire off. It's the grease fitting that goes in the end of the shaft that greases that pinion. So we'll screw that in there. We're going to have to hold that shaft with a pair of pliers. We'll get it down here. I put a right-angled one on so you can get to it with the tire in your way. Now I think we're done. Outside of you got to put the cover back on, but that's pretty simple. Well, that's it for the snowblower. The boss ought to be happy. Of course, now it'll probably snow and he'll be mad at me. So the only thing we got to do is put that cover on the back, which is pretty simple. We got everything else in there. I've got to run down the hardware and get a roll pin. Lost my train of thought there. And take that cotter key out and replace that roll pin. And this is done. It wasn't that bad, and it was cheap. We made all the parts, and we had some fun doing it. So if you got one of these things to fix, try making the parts yourself if you got the equipment to do it with. I know there's a few guys out there that have machine shops in their garages and basements. It's real easy to make this stuff. If you have any questions or comments, put them in the description box below. Yes, I did buy t-shirts. Had a lot of people hounding me about, hey, get some t-shirts. Got t-shirts. If you have any questions or comments, like I said, put them in the box below and I'll get back with you as soon as I can. Until next time, work safe, have fun, and I hope we never have to use these snow blowers. See you later.